I made it. Hi, everybody. Nice to see y'all this evening. Betty, welcome back. Nice to see your smiling face. Um, I didn't have as many technical difficulties as I'd anticipated tonight. So, hey, Michelle, we're going to go ahead and get started with our screen share, just like this. Nope. So we've got our usual lineup of photos. I don't hear the. Do you guys hear the music? I didn't hear the music. Um, so
It's real quiet, Cam.
okay.
Very quiet.
All right. Yeah. Let me. I think I outsmarted myself again. All right. Let's try one more time from the beginning. Well, or maybe from the next screen. We're off to a great start, and that's why I put these clips in because this is how I feel every week. It seems like I've never done this before, so yeah. Sometimes we just want to do that, but instead we're going to go on and we're going to check out this fungi. I mean fungi. Um, the chicken of the woods is we've talked a lot about mushrooms, and we are really at the peak of our fall mushrooming this time of year with this rain, and then we got more rain over the past weekend. These things are popping up all over the place. And chicken of the woods, we've actually got a couple of different types in this area. They don't all have eyeballs. In fact, very few of them do. We've got Laetiporus sulphureus and then Cincinnatus, and they're very similar and they're both edible. For those of you who fancy eating things that you foraged, you can tell the difference in the coloring, but you probably want to consult a few mushroom guides. Don't just take Miss Pam's word for it. They're not. Neither one of them is um, going to be toxic, but one of them is a little bit more edible, a little less chewy than the other one. L. cincinnatus is tender throughout. Sulphureus, which is the more colorful of the two, this is the one we're looking at here. It's got yellow around the edges, and then typically it has a deeper orange hue to it. That one is going to have some tough parts to it. You're going to have to do a little bit more trimming. And you definitely want to cook this mushroom. I know some of us, we've gotten in the habit of buying white mushrooms at the store, and you can eat those raw. They're in a lot of salad bars. Most of the species in this area, if you're going to be foraging, picking them in the wild, you definitely want to cook them because there's different compounds that might play a few little tricks on your mind. Saute them. Uh, Boiling them usually just makes them, I don't know, kind of tough or kind of mushy. But if you fry them in oil or saute them in butter, you're going to be very pleased because, like the name says, chicken of the woods. They do taste like chicken. In fact, they even have a texture like chicken. I've talked before about hen of the woods. Hen of the woods is does have a chewy texture like meat, but it's because of the way the mushroom is shaped, it's more shredded. It's more like shredded meat as opposed to like slabs of chicken breast, which is what chicken of the woods reminds me of. Um, now, I have to confess, I never even heard of this show until somebody wrote me about it. It's called La Brea, apparently on NBC, and it's sort of a sci-fi series where a sinkhole opens up and it turns into kind of this survivor type of program. Well, the reason I'm bringing it up is because someone wrote to me and pointed out that on La Brea, they actually had a pivotal scene where these people they're being forced to forage and for their own survival, and they go out into the woods and they find these mushrooms, which they actually called chicken of the woods. Um, and that ain't right. um, Chicken of the woods, even out on the west coast, it's going to have the same kind of colors. There's a few other species in this genus, but that orange color or yellow color is going to identify it. And what they showed there actually looks a little bit more like an oyster mushroom. So I don't know. If you've heard of it, if you've watched the show, if you're a fan of it, I'm not saying yay or nay to the TV show itself. I'm just saying, as is so often the case in Hollywood, if they could just find a nature nerd or two to have on the set to, point out and maybe improve their accuracy a little bit, that would be awesome. So, with that, those of you who tuned in last week, you know that I tried a little technology. I tried to put mushrooms to music, and it didn't work. So, doggone it, we're going to try it again. We're going to try it again, but I'm going to see if I can turn this down just a little bit. Because I want to do some talking while we look at these pretty pictures. So here we've got some puffballs. Some of them, they look like a planet or maybe a moon. They get really big too. These were mushrooms that we found on a walk a couple of weeks ago. They started, one was the size of a baseball, and then the softball, and then the volleyball. Sometimes we'll see them the size of a basketball or a beach ball. They really are doing well this year with that burst of moisture that we've gotten. There's puffballs everywhere. I'm not going to claim to know any of the following mushrooms. All I know is that they are really cool, and it doesn't hurt to slow down a little bit, take some time to look at and maybe smell the mushrooms. Now this one here, this might almost be a slime mold. It looks pretty soft and squishy like we do have earlier in the season. We have a fungus that looks like this that is categorized as a slime mold, not a fungus. And when you push it, liquids come out. Here's another soft, maybe a jelly fungus. Here's a look at our different parts. This is really helpful if you go about trying to identify mushrooms yourself. There's things they're going to ask, are there gills or are there pores underneath? Gills are those, they look like, gills on a fish. They're going around the underside of the cap in a sort of a rayed fashion, kind of like an upside down flower. Some species will have a ring on the stem. Some will not. So that's sometimes a key characteristic that you're going to need to look at. And of course, all the fungi that we're seeing right now, that is just the fruiting body. That's what's producing the spores so that these fantastic organisms can continue. What really drives them though and brings them back and allows them to do their important job of decomposing organic material in the woods is what's going on underneath the ground, the hyphae and the mycelium that's spread out. Now these aren't plants, they're in their own kingdom, but the mycelium, if you could think of that as sort of as the roots or the nutrient gathering part of the organism, that's what's going on underneath the ground. So Laura, I'm going to thank you we're going to finish up with this one again, one last puffball. But I looked at it and I thought we might have some kids watching tonight, so we're going to dress it up a little bit before we move on. Great photos. A lot of you contributed those. I very much appreciate it. And We may look at fungus one more time before winter sets in. I don't know, with the rains, they're just popping up all over the place. Enjoy them while they're here, folks. So this was a photo I snapped last Friday. Some of the local nature nerds, we were out for a walk at Dick Young Forest Preserve, and there was a long swath. By and large, the prairie plants, the flowering plants, the forbs out on the prairie, they're pretty much done. They've finished flowering, the flowers have turned into seeds, and seed collection has begun. But there was this strip along the path at Dick Young that was mowed, and it prompted a second surge of growth on these plants. And here's a cup plant. Now, we talked about cup plant a few weeks ago. Cup plant, like the ones that were growing in Jerry's yard, they're 6 foot, 7 foot. The rayed flowers that are on these plants come up way, way, way above our heads. But here at this mowed swath, this was maybe knee high, if even, maybe more like 18 inches. It was this short, squat little cup plant, which I thought in itself was worthy of a photo. And then after I snapped the first picture, I looked at it and I thought, oh, and, this happened a few months ago at Delnor Woods when I took the picture of the Joe Pye weed, and I looked at it and I said, oh, wait a minute, it's got schmutz on it. And then I looked a little closer, and that schmutz has got antennae. That schmutz is an ambush bug. These insects are really common on prairie flowers. There's several different types. This is the genus of this insect is Phymata. We've got Phymata americana. We've got Phymata Pennsylvanicus. I'm not going to go back and forth over what exact species it is, but Phymata actually means swollen. And if you look at the forelegs of these insects, you see how enlarged they are. It's not swollen from injury. It's they're large because they prey on other insects. They ambush them. They hang out, looking like schmutz on a brig, and they blend in really, really well. They use that camouflage to their advantage. And they overpower honeybees, different types of beetles, other true bugs that come to feed on the nectar and or pollen of these flowers. Well, back in the 1990s, somebody decided they were going to, these authors decided they were going to take a look at the effectiveness of the ambush bug and its camouflage. They wanted to determine whether the presence of the bug would affect the behavior of other insects that were coming to feed on these flowers. And surprise, surprise, they found that the study indicated that in the late summer and early fall, the presence of predators on the flower head will affect the insect's visits to the occupied plant. Now, I looked to see if there was further study on this because this to me sort of seemed, I don't know, obvious. But I didn't see any other insects visiting that plant, and maybe there's a learning curve that goes on over the course of the warm weather months, and by the time we get to the later time of year, insects know to avoid flowers that have ambush bugs on them. I have seen ambush bugs feeding quite readily on a number of insects, but I am going to try and remember to look next year. It could be I was seeing them feeding earlier in the season in June or July. This October ambush bug, maybe they do go hungry as time goes on, as insects learn to avoid that somewhat of a camouflage, but also somewhat of a warning color pattern on these guys. Keep an eye out for them. Since we've had a frost, but it wasn't super deep. I would imagine some of these have taken cover. If you find yourself in a prairie and you find there's still some flowers out there, look, especially on our asters, you might be able to find yourself an ambush bug. So, Laura, I have to thank you for this photo. This picture came in a couple of weeks ago, and it was an interesting looking plant. It's one of those plants where I think because it's fairly common, we tend to not really pay much attention to it. It's not on a lot of radars the way some of our more, shall we say, popular plants are. Um, this is common dog bane, and this is in the going to seed portion of its life cycle. Earlier in the year, and by the way, there's some wonderful info. I don't know if I've touted this website often enough to you guys. IllinoisWildflowers.info. It catalogs pretty much every plant we have growing in our state, and as not just our herbaceous plants, but it's also got trees, it's got vines, it's got natives, it's got introduced species. It's really, really a helpful resource. IllinoisWildflowers.info. But anyway, this shows the plant in its flowering stage. What it doesn't show is the leaf. When you break the leaf of dog bane off, it has a milky sap. That gives us a clue as to the family it belongs to, Apocynaceae, which literally means without the dog. That's from the Greek, and this the toxins in the sap were used apparently to poison dogs at one point. I hope that practice has ceased. I know my dogs aren't going to appreciate if I ever, you know, told them about that. But the Apocynaceae family and the that Dogbane belongs to, you might know this family whether you realize it or not, because it's also the family that milkweed belongs to. So there's kind of a little story behind the story. When you see the plant in its when the pods are bursting open and the seeds are flying away, it might sort of remind you of milkweed. When you see it in its flowering stage and you break off a leaf and there's milky sap coming out of it, that might remind you of milkweed. Well, there's all very good reasons for that because they are in the same family. Now, one thing that dogbane has that milkweed might have to a certain extent, but it's not ever really been exploited for this characteristic, is the fibrous material that's in the stem of the plant. Dogbane has been harvested for hundreds of years and used to make cordage. You can actually find websites now, a lot of survival websites, some of the old ways websites, flint knapping websites. They will talk about how you can harvest the stems of dogbane. You split them open, you work the stems to get that fibrous material out, and then you can roll it, you twist it together, you braid it, and you can make a pretty strong string or rope, depending on how many layers you want to twist together. But it's pretty strong, and it was very, very useful to our indigenous people back before the settlers came with their own types of ropes. One other thing on Illinois wildflowers. .info, every plant that they list there, they list the faunal associations. And again, everybody talks about milkweed because milkweed is what monarch butterflies feed on. In fact, Diane, I have to thank you for correcting me. A couple of years ago, I had found a milkweed caterpillar, I'm sorry, a monarch caterpillar on dogbane. And I just assumed that since they were in the same family, that dogbane was a food plant for the monarch, just the same way milkweed is. Well, it isn't. And I thought about it some more. The caterpillar that I saw that time was it wasn't feeding. It was going into its J shape, which is what they do before they form a chrysalis. They shed their skin one more time and create that covering where they then pupate. Well, that doesn't mean, just because they're not a host plant for monarch caterpillars, it doesn't mean that the dogbane plant is a slouch. Look at all these insects that are associated with this plant. Chris, I have to thank you for the photo on the right. This is a dogbane leaf beetle, and they look superficially, you might get the impression that you're looking at a Japanese beetle, but there's less brown, less coppery color. There's more iridescent green. There's no white dots around the edges of the wing coverings like we see on the Japanese beetle. But this is an insect that does serve to help control dog bane. Because it's part of the milk, related to milkweed. You know how like common milkweed will take over an area sometimes because it seeds so prolifically. Dogbane can do the same thing, and so the dogbane beetles are some of the one of the control mechanisms that helps to feed on the plant and maybe keep it from completely overpopulating in an area. So, with that, let's go into the mailbag here. We haven't talked about snakes in what, 2 weeks? You know, it's a favorite topic of mine, and this is relevant in that snakes are preparing to head into their hibernacula, the areas that they will spend the winter. This woman, she was a little bit concerned because she had this large and heavy-bodied looking snake moving around the foundation of her house. As it turns out, we corresponded a little bit. I learned that she lived on a golf course, so it wasn't unusual to see this snake where she lived because golf courses frequently have water. And this is a northern water snake. Now, so I blew up the photo that she sent me so we could go over again the ID traits for this species. But if we look, even though it's blurry, you can see the head that's in the upper center of the photo. Right behind the head, there is markings that go across, all the way across from side to side. There's complete bands that go down the neck of the snake. There's one, two, three, four, say four, maybe five bands going down the neck. And then once we get farther down in the body, the pattern shifts and those bands are no longer complete. It's more of a blotchy pattern, um, alternating dark blotches on the back and the side of the snake. Um, and that is the identifying characteristic for the northern water snake. So the woman who wrote was immensely relieved to find out that, A, we don't have venomous species typically in this area. There's always a chance, I suppose, somebody could let one go, but they're not native to this area. And so she was happy to learn that. I did mention to her that just because it's not venomous, it doesn't mean that you should handle them. This is what can happen if you're a little careless. This was a water snake we found on a King County certified naturalist field trip a couple of years ago. They are quick to bite and they will bite repeatedly in an effort to get what they feel is an immediate threat to, quit being threatening. Um, but the cool thing, and I know I've said this before too, these snakes do not have long teeth. They're a millimeter or less in length. They can break the skin, and yes, I did clean up the wounds afterwards, but within 2 days you couldn't even tell that I'd been bitten. So um, they're also handy snakes to have around because of the way they help. They feed usually on or oftentimes on injured or sick fish, so they help keep fish populations strong. They also feed on their share of frogs and tadpoles as well. But anyway, this is the time of year when snakes are going to be looking for refuge for the winter. They can sometimes go into foundations of houses depending on how tight the foundation is. If there's cracks in it, if it's an older structure, they might find their way in. Um, that's you're the owner of a house like that, it's, I guess, up to you how you want to handle that. I would advocate for letting them be, because they, unlike a mouse that's trying to get in from the severe weather to come, snakes aren't going to chew up your wires. They aren't continually urinating the way mice are as they run around the house. They're not trying to get into your stored, foods, your cereals, your birdseed, whatever. They just want to spend the winter in quiet before they, you know, springtime comes and they leave again. In fact, they might even avail themselves of a mouse or two if they're spending the winter in your basement or crawl space. So that's just my 2 cents. I'm always going to come down on the side of the snake on these things. Um, with that, last week we played a round of Guess the Nature thing. We're going to do it again. Um, and it's actually a living thing this time. Here it is. Um, it's a moth. I'll give you that much. Um, this is a moth that it'll probably be more relevant next year. Now we know it's a moth. One, it's very furry, and that's generally a characteristic of moths. When we look at those antennae, we can see that they are thread-like. There's no knobs on the end. If there was a knob or a club, it would be a butterfly or a skipper, but they're a thread-like antennae, so we know we're looking at a moth. We can see just a little glimpse of pattern on the abdomen underneath the wings. What we're looking at here is the Isabella tiger moth. And you might be thinking, okay, so why is this relevant? We're, again, with temperatures are starting to cool, flying insects. Flying insects, they need a temperature of about 55 degrees. Now, we do have some winter moths that are sort of exempt from that. They can get their body temperature warmed up through friction, and they will fly on colder nights. This moth, though, I don't believe is one of them. The reason I wanted to bring it up is because I have seen so many, and you have probably seen so many of the larvae of the Isabella tiger moth this fall. These guys are everywhere. The woolly bears, they by and large will have black on either end and brown in the middle, although at same walk at Dick Young Forest Preserve last Friday, we found this woolly bear here. It just got a little tiny cap of black on one end, and the whole rest of the body is brown. Now, if you're like me, you're probably sitting there scratching your head. Now, how does that folklore go? What is it about the coloring on the woolly bear caterpillar? Well, if we go to the old farmer's almanac, we can look up and be reminded that if the brown part is wide, it's going to be a mild winter. The more black, the more severe the winter. So, I was kind of curious where that came from, and I did a little bit more digging on the Farmer's Almanac website, and it turns out there was a fella named Dr. Curran who worked at the American Museum of Natural History in New York. And he'd heard this saying, and he decided he was going to check it out. So he also found it was a great excuse to get out of the city. He and his wife would go up to Bear Mountain State Park, and over a period of 8 years, he gathered woolly bears and he measured how much of their body was brown. Now, underneath that fuzz on the caterpillar, there's 13 body segments. And he found over that 8-year period that anywhere from 5.3 to 5.6 of the 13 segments on the caterpillar were brown. So that's more than a third of the body. And just as it happened, those 8 years, the temperatures and the precipitation, everything, the winters then were mild. So, was it coincidence? There's been other studies since then who have that have disproven that. And actually, to show you just exactly how firmly Dr. Curran had his tongue planted in his cheek, he called himself and his friends, his wife, the original Society of the Friends of the Woolly Bear. Now, these guys, the woolly bear, there's a few towns. There's one, I believe, in Ohio. I think there's another one somewhere on the East Coast. I'm not sure if it's Virginia. There's festivals that celebrate woolly bears, also known as woolly worms. If you're thinking about traveling and you like to have a nice nature theme to your travels, you might want to look some of those towns up, because they'll have woolly bear races. They'll crown the woolly bear king and queen. There's a lot of tradition that goes along with that folklore with these cool insects. So now what happens if you find one and there's no brown at all? Um, these insects are on the move as well. Um, Looking at it, you might think, well, is it? Let's watch it again. It was this one was in kind of a hurry. This was a warmish day that I made this video. Um, there is a little bit of a brownish cast, but it really, if you've got this caterpillar in your sights, and I was going to say in your hand, but you want to be kind of careful when you handle a fuzzy caterpillar, because some of those hairs can have little barbs on the end of them, and if those barbs get into your skin, they can make you quite itchy. Um, but anyway, this we'll watch it one more time. There's actually reddish bands underneath the fur that are part of the skin that go from one side to the other. Um, this When you see a caterpillar like this, it doesn't mean that we're doomed, that it's just going to be polar vortex from November to March. What it means is that you found the larvae of a giant leopard moth. Um, Now, by giant, these aren't as big as, say, Cecropia, Polyphemus, a Luna moth. They're not the size of the palm of your hand. I would say the insect might from one end to the other be an inch and a half or so, maybe a little bit bigger than that. And then the leopard part of the name comes from the spots on the insect. So keep an eye open for them, for the larvae, the insects. The adults aren't flying right now, but the caterpillars are definitely crawling on. They're going to spend the winter in leaf litter, in wood piles, maybe in decomposing logs. It's yet another example of that term we're hearing so much of these days, that leave the leaves. If you can leave your leaves in place on site, underneath your shrubbery. I know at my house, and also I take care of the lawn at my mom's house. It's amazing the places you can find to just pile the leaves up. I usually find some small branches to lay on the top, especially if I know we're going to get some wind, because I don't want the neighbors to say, oh, your leaves blew all over my yard, which they've, of course, leaf blown to death or had their lawn service, blow away all the leaves. But if you can leave the leaves, you're going to increase the survival chances for organisms like this. It's a great movement. I know I'm on board. I hope you guys are too. Now, this is a little promo for an upcoming event that they're going on in a lot of different parts of the Chicago area, but I wanted to make you aware of the one that's going on here in St. Charles. The pumpkin smash, and I got the flyer from the folks at Scarce, and then I realized that it still said 2020, so I slapped in the current year, so that's why that font looks a little funny there. But um, putting the Halloween pumpkin into the trash is done so frequently, and it's really adding a lot to our landfills that doesn't have to go that direction. Pumpkins are eminently compostable. They're soft, they're mushy, they break down readily, and there are commercial composting facilities who actually welcome pumpkin. Uh-oh, what happened? There we go. That welcome pumpkins at this time of year, and Scarce here in the greater DuPage and Kane areas is sponsoring a number of these events. But look online, there might be other enviro organizations if you happen to not be here in Kane County or DuPage County that are sponsoring these things. But the idea is to prevent your Halloween pumpkins from, filling up your trash can and then the landfill. So the one that's happening here in St. Charles is going to be over here at the Public Works complex, which is on 7th Avenue, and from 9 until and it's the week. The Saturday after Halloween. Halloween is on Sunday this year. So it's on Saturday, November 6th, 9 a.m. to noon. If you guys can help get the word out, I know there are a few things that they ask if there's a candle inside, or I know a lot of us are using the battery operated candles. Make sure none of that is in there. If there's decorations that have been stuck on the outside, if you can take those off. I believe paint, as long as it's water-based paint. I think paints are allowed. But anyway, bring them on over. There's a nice group of high school volunteers that will be more than happy to take the pumpkins off of your hands, and they'll have dumpsters there too that are ready to receive these. Last year, the collection was so successful, the dumpster was full before noon. So I believe this year they're going to have at least two on hand. And if you can spread the word, that's a lot of material we can keep out of the landfills. With that, folks, that's all I had for you this week. There was a couple other items that didn't quite come together. I'm going to stop the screen share here, and I'm going to turn it over to you. Looks like we've got some chats here. And oh, Sarah, I knew you were going to ask that. Hyphae and mycelium. I believe the hyphae are the active decomposing parts on the end of the mycelium that actually help the decomposition occur. Um, and if I'm wrong about that, I will let you know. But I saw that on there, and I mix those things up in my mind myself. But I believe that's the active growing part. And if anybody else knows differently, if you want to hop on the chat and clear that up, that'd be great. And yes, tiger moth, you're exactly right, Michelle. And Diane, yes, Vermilion, Ohio has the Woolly Bear Festival. Have you ever been to that one, Di? Um, um, it's something I.
Sorry, I was away from my computer.
Were you
Um,
sleeping?
no, I'm watching it on my television, but I have to talk to my computer. But anyway, I have never been to it, but I used to hear about it all the time living in the Cleveland area. Because Vermilion is just to the west of Cleveland.
Okay.
And so, they would talk about it on the news, and then we'd get to see some shots of the parade and so on. So,
Yeah, it's
yeah.
from what I understand, it's a big deal, and
Yeah,
yeah, it's
they have a parade, and I think they have a queen woolly bear or her princess or something.
yeah.
And
They from what I've read, yeah, they crown a king and a queen. They and there's different towns will have different spins on it, but I love traveling to see quirky stuff like that, and so
right, and
that's
they actually used to have a weatherman in the Cleveland area, and I can't think of it. Wally Canaan, I think his name was. But anyway, he was always the head of the Woolly Bear Festival. So that's why I think we got so much media coverage, because
he
he
was
was the
already had the
weatherman, and then he was
connection.
also the Woolly Bear guru. So anyway, it was just a lot of
Fun.
fun.
Yeah. Well, I will definitely put those in mind for future travels, and they seem to be concentrated in the east. Like I said, it's Virginia or West Virginia, I think, is where the other big one is. But cool. I'm
Okay.
glad we got some firsthand information on that. Um, Jerry wants to know how long should we leave the leaf litter alone in areas where we don't want it around year round? Well, the cool thing and what I saw with like I'll rake it because especially at my mom's house, it's they she does want some lawn area. And if you leave, she's got a lot of maples in her yard, and that those maple leaves will smother the grass and kill the grass, and it leads to other problems. So I will move those. I'll rake them and I'll pile them up. And Jerry, by they really do decompose pretty quickly, and they amend the soil then too in the areas where I pile them up at. They really don't. I don't know. Do you know what your leaf composition is? Is it maple or oak or elm or?
It depends. It's different in different parts of the yard. My neighbor's got, I don't know what kind of tree it is, but it's a really tough leaf.
Ah.
And my backyard garden, it just doesn't decompose like I want it to, and it drives me batty. So I'm happy to leave it for a while and then I clear it out because it just bugs me. The stuff in the front is all maple. And actually, what I wind up doing is on the grassy areas, which I just mow it or put it
Okay.
in the
Yeah,
right.
to hasten the breakdown.
Yeah, but then in the garden areas, I just leave it until the spring in areas where it would smother the plants.
Something I know I've done in my backyard is if you toss a little soil over the leaves, that brings a whole host of more decomposing, bacteria and little organisms that can speed up that process even farther.
Maybe I'll
Um,
try that. I was going to put a lot of the leaves in my compost, but now I'm worried that I'll be killing bugs if I do that.
well,
Dang.
one of the segments that didn't come together for tonight, but I will try and add it next week. It's sort of a compost corollary. I have a trash can that I've drilled holes all around. It's a plastic can, and I've put like half-inch holes all the way around the sides and also underneath, so air can get in and out, and moisture can get in and out, but it really makes a nice ideal environment for decomposition. What I have been just tickled to death to find in my composter that I didn't add to is compost worms. I know people will send away, they'll buy these worms for their composter. Um, and I don't know how they found my compost can, but they must be nearby, and when they find a ready source of food like that, they move in and they just have at it. So even though worms aren't native, and we certainly find that they're doing damage in our natural our wooded areas, our woodlands, in a garden or yard environment, they can really move things along and help get those leaves broken down for you.
I'll give it a
Oh.
whirl.
You got worms. All right. Um, so how what can we tell you about the crickets we are hearing now? Okay, so are you talking about species, Sarah? Like who's singing right now, or um, the one of our most common there's they're kind of like bookend species, the Springfield cricket and the fall field cricket. Um, the fall field cricket doesn't start to sing until we get into the latter part of the year, but it looks almost identical to the Springfield cricket. Um, I don't know if I can pull up. Um, let's see. Um, they're the black crickets, and the females have the long ovipositor coming out the rear end, and the males have the two. Well, both males and females have the two other structures. I don't know what those are called. Circe, I think. Um, but they've been calling recently. Um, no matter what the species, we tend to think of tree crickets as being the temperature crickets, but all of these guys will call at a slower rate as the temperature starts to drop. Um, let's see if I can hold this up. We get the weird. Yep. I don't know if that's gonna work. Actually, you know what? I could do a screen share. Hold on. Um, but I don't know if there was something specific we wanted to talk about with that. If there was a certain sound you were hearing. Um, so here they are. Here's a female. You can see the ovipositor there. Again, they'll be mating, laying eggs, depositing the eggs in the soil, and then those will hatch out next year. But that's what I got for the crickets that we're hearing at this time of year. Unless anybody else has something else to chime in with, I'll stop the share.
I just wanted to share. So not this past weekend, but the weekend before, I was at LaBaugh Woods in Chicago, which
Yeah.
is a cool place. And there's a lot of deer there, and I saw a small herd. But what was interesting was I saw at least three males, but then heard in the distance, like I couldn't really see them through the trees, clashing horns.
Oh, yeah.
And I got all excited. And then one splashed through the slough a little bit. It was really cool. And so I Googled it, and it turns out, I guess, mating season starts in October.
Yeah.
But then it made me wonder, why do I usually see does and hardly ever see bucks?
Oh.
If you're driving along, I don't know. I always see does and never bucks.
Um, it could be that they're the ones that are in competition with each other, and they might be more spread out. Um, they're and this is a time of year when car deer collisions increase quite a bit because uh, hormones start flowing, and they don't make as good decisions when they're running across roads. Um, I know there was when I worked at Red Oak, there was this massive buck that I would see usually when I would be leaving at night, so it would be dark out. So maybe the does kind of hang out. They're not really competing with each other. It's the bucks that compete for kind of the prize of the does. So it could be they have to be a little bit more wary of each other.
Well, that would make sense. And then
Uh,
seeing several bucks now makes sense because they were mixed in with the does and they're digging the does.
Hello, ladies. Well,
Exactly.
this is also the time of year when our smaller trees and the saplings, some of the shrubs that we have, they really start to take a beating because the males will be rubbing really vigorously with their antlers. Um, the velvet that covers freshly grown antlers, that's gone by now. But the rubbing, so they're not rubbing to remove the velvet, but they are rubbing. They do have a forehead scent gland, and roughing up the bark on a tree, and then getting that scent there is helping to you know, spread the word that this particular buck has been through this area. Um, yeah, they've got some other scent glands too on their legs and things like that. There's all kinds of different means of communication that they're using to let the other bucks in the area know that this is their territory. Now, some of you might recall a few years ago we had the incident over here at Norris Woods where two bucks were clashing and they got their antlers locked together. The one we knew both of the bucks because they were just really really big boys. One was a 14 point buck and the other one was 17 points. And the 17 pointer, he actually had what they would call an atypical or asymmetrical, atypical rack, where the two sides were not the same. And on one side he had this drop tine, so that's what we called him, was drop tine, when we because we could recognize him. And then young buck he was big and he had this nice rack, but he was sort of the newcomer on the scene on the east side of St. Charles. And well, the two of them clashed one night at Norris Woods, and young buck got a tine wedged behind the drop tine on the other buck, and they couldn't get apart. And they wrestled back and forth, and they didn't survive. We don't know exactly what happened when our restoration crew found them the next morning. There was a huge area of disturbance where the leaves were all kicked away, and it was down to the bare ground where you could see they had just spun around back and forth. But both animals then were missing parts of their hindquarters because the coyotes had already moved in and had a little bit of a feast. Now, it didn't look as though there were any fatal wounds. So we called the IDNR to report what we'd found, because we did end up harvesting both of the heads from those deer, and that's the skulls that we have on display at Hickory Knolls now. But the IDNR guy said that what oftentimes happens is that one of the bucks will have a heart attack, and then the other one is left with 300 pounds of animal stuck to his head, and he usually perishes shortly after that. So it could be one had a heart attack and then the coyotes moved in and finished the other one off, whatever it was. But it was the first week of November that happened. So there's going to be a lot of clashing going around, and that does usually happen at night. So, yeah, keep an eye out for those signs. Listen, like Jerry's doing, listen for the sound of antlers clashing. Look for the rubs on trees. And yeah, it's an exciting time for those deer. Be very, very careful, though, when you're out driving, because you don't want that kind of excitement of having a deer run right in front of you. Um, let's see. Michelle, you found what maybe is a puffball. Oh, I need access, so I will request access, and then we'll see if we can take a look at that. Um, let's see. You know what, Michelle? I don't see it here. Let me try again. You said it, so it looks like a puffball, but it looks different from other puffballs.
Yeah, I can share it from my end. I was just trying to.
Oh, yeah.
My
Why
end
don't you
it
go
shows
ahead
you
and do
should be
that?
able to see it.
Um,
So here's my daughter holding it. It's like it was the biggest one I have ever seen.
it
I
is.
don't know if it's a puffball.
I think, you know what, Michelle? I think it is, but I think it's a little past its prime.
Because like the inside was darker, and usually I've seen them as white.
Yes. So this is what puffballs are made to do. So if you want to eat a puffball, you don't want to eat when it gets to that stage, it's not edible anymore. But puffballs, that's the fruiting body of that particular type of fungus, and that's trillions and trillions of spores in there. So when that pops open on its own, those just sort of disseminate and they get taken away by the wind and they just spread all over the place. And that's how we get more puffballs. So, yes, what you found, that is Gigantea, the giant puffball, but it is in it's no longer edible stage. So and that's as we progress through the season, we're going to see more and more puffballs that aren't that firm white anymore. They turn kind of brownish or yellow, and then the insides, that's the spores forming, and it is really cool and huge too. I mean, those that was a massive, um, and it wherever it is. Maybe there'll be puffballs, and its legacy will appear next year from those spores that it leaves behind. Does anybody else have anything they'd like to share? Um, if if not, really appreciate. Oh, Sarah's just surprised at how many crickets you heard lately. Yeah,
Just take a
despite the
picture with
cold.
Pam so she could see you with the puff ball. Oh, sorry. I didn't know it was fun. Sorry.
Um, yes, there's I've heard quite a few. In fact, my ultimate plan tonight was to sit outside and do this, but that didn't come together either today. Um, I have a recording of it's an orthopter, and I don't know exactly which species it was, but it was still singing in the Potawatomi Native Plant Garden in December last year. So there's still those. There'll be fewer and fewer, I guess, as we go on, but boy, they'll hang in there for as long as they can. Um, Next week, a little spoiler alert, we're going to look at this phenomenon of fall color and why we don't have much of it. We are starting to see things turning. In fact, that just the last couple of days, we had that frost over the weekend, and now some of the colors are starting to come. But our fall has been so unseasonably warm that the trees, the fluids are still moving throughout the trees. The leaves are getting what they need, and that signal to stop producing chlorophyll just hasn't happened. So, um, I think going along with that warmer temperature trend, we're hearing crickets and insects like that later in the season than we normally would. So, with that, folks, we're just about at 9 o'clock. If nobody has anything else to share, I just want to say, as always, thanks so much for your time, and I look forward to seeing you back here again next week. Have a great rest of your week, everybody. Take care.
Pam.
Thanks,
Thanks,
Pam.
Pam.
Good
Thank
night.
you.
Thank
Night,
you.
everybody.
Thanks, Pam.
Bye,
Thanks, Pam.
Thanks, Pam.
guys.